Hi, this is Chris from Orange Coast College's art department, trying out our watercolors for the first time. Now, what I've got in front of me here is I've got my palette, all my colors are in it, I've got some paper, and I've got some shapes that I want to fill in with flat washes. Flat wash means I want even color application within that shape. And this is really just a chance to try every color in our palette and see what it looks like, while also just beginning to get the feel for using watercolor and our brushes. So I'm going to get my number 8 brush here, which is a pretty good size for these kind of shapes. Let's not use small brushes for this. You want to always use the biggest brush you comfortably can. So I'm going to get my number 8 ready. I've taken out my squirt bottle, and you don't have to do this, you can do this with your brush, it's just cleaner, and I've already squirted all the colors in my palette. Looks like that guy needs a little bit more. And that kind of just activates my paint. And so I'm going to move across in the spectrum for fun. So I'm actually going to start over here with some violet, then go to some rose, then cool red, warm red, on through like this until I reach my naturals over here. So I'm just going to start up here and kind of go one by one, and we'll see if we can time lapse a little bit. So I'm going to start with some violet. I'm just going to get some water in my well and then mix some paint into that water. And I can probably do most of these shapes with one load of paint in my bristles in my brush, but we'll see. I'm testing to see how much pigment I've got by how transparent that is on my white palette. So now I'm going to soak up, get my brush pretty full, and I'm going to work top down. My paper is tilted so that the water will run down to the bottom, and I'll keep my wet edge going down. So what I always want to do is keep my edge at the bottom wet. And so if I let that dry, it will leave a mark from where I let it dry and it went back again. So I'm going to just knock off some of that paint back into my well and then soak up the remaining paint on the paper with my brush. That's all I want to do. So let's see what that looks like again. So I'm going to go to my rose. I'm just going to knock a little bit of water in here and now start pulling paint into that water until I've sort of judged just the opacity on the palette. That's why I'm putting it up there, so I can see how much paint I've got in it. And I'm working top to bottom, letting my wet edge go down to the bottom. So this is actually gonna be more than enough with one fully loaded brush. All right, let's do another, and then we'll just time lapse the rest of these guys. So I'm going to move over here to my alizarin crimson. This one will be a little harder. Because I need to make adjustments for those tops of the T's. And on down. Here we go. Now, one of the things you might be asking yourself is, how do I know how much water to add to the well? And as I mentioned before, I'm testing a little bit by drawing it up the well a little bit to see how opaque the pigment with water is in the well. And that really just comes from experience. But what I'm shooting for here is to not have it too light like a tint or too dark where it's opaque and the light can't get through it and hit the paper to show us the brilliance that is watercolor. That's one of the things that separates watercolor from all other media, is the transparency can be magic when you get the opacity of the paint right. So I'm looking for good, solid opacity that looks like my palette, maybe a little bit lighter because I don't want it so dark and opaque. I want to see what I can expect in the future. But I really don't want to add too much water where it's a tint of the pigment and not a good representation of the pigment itself. And it takes a little experimentation. One thing you might notice is I just used my Payne's Gray and Van Dyke Brown really dark because that's typically how I use them. I don't want to ever use black, but I want to use really dark colors. So one gives me a warm and one gives me a cool. Okay, so there you have it. Pretty good even washes. You may notice that my number 8's not going to get really sharp corners, but I'm okay letting my sharp corners go for now on something like this to get big brush practice. In some instances, I was going as fast as I can because I didn't pre-mix enough paint in the wells. And so I was really hustling to get it done. You may have also noticed I was releasing some of the paint back into the well to soak up whatever was left at the bottom of the shape. But this is the idea. So this gives me a really good idea what is in my palette. So now it's your turn. Go ahead and sort of inventory the color you've got in your palette. Think of some shapes to put out on a sheet of paper. I drew them in with a 4H pencil, so they're fairly light. And go for it. Have some fun, explore, get to see what your paints look like once they hit the paper. Good luck.